sophisticated, more complicated test of hive defense. But whichever test you're going to use, then you're going to find that these bees change the population, change it very quickly. Using some very high-powered computers at NASA, we were able to take from populations after they've been in the United States for a period of about 15 years, and we took the conditions of where those populations occurred, okay, and then put them in there and then ran a weather program. We were able to come up with this mapping of areas that might be suitable for Africanized honeybees in the Americas. So it's based on where they now existed in the U.S., then adding in the weather data to be able to say where would they perhaps go. So the intensity of the blue color here would indicate that there's relatively little chance in Minnesota that there's going to be Africanized materials. That's very dark, okay, very blue. However, you can see where the intensity going to the red color is the probability that it's going to be a population that's Africanized. And so in between these two areas, you have conditions where, under favorable conditions, a population more adapted for South Florida, South Texas, Southern California, is going to move north. So during the summer period, that population has a chance to move north. But then during unfavorable conditions, depending how long it is, those environmental conditions are not going to allow those colonies to survive winter, and the population is going to be moved south. So these areas of lighter color in between are areas where we're saying populations will exist, but it may not be the dominant bee. Now add to that these dots, okay? These dots represent where the majority of the queen breeders are. Okay, where we raise the majority of queens in the States. So what are we going to do? Some biologists at UC San Diego have been looking at the amount of Africanized bees, African bee genetic material in the bees of California. They've been doing this study since the 90s. Their last study was last year, published in PLOS ONE, one of our journals. They found that the Africanized honeybee continues its spread, move its range northward since it was first introduced into Southern California. The first good record we have is 1994 in Southern California. In Southern California, specifically San Diego, where UC San Diego is, more than 60% of foraging bees, 60% of foraging bees, these are bees taken off of flowers in a random fashion, more than 60% are Africanized. That is, with our markers, genetically, we're picking up that genetic material, Africanized honeybees. When they went to collect the foragers in front of foraging honeybee colonies, the percentage was only 13%. So coming out of our managed honeybee colonies, a much smaller percentage than if you went to random flowers in San Diego, picked the bee off, ran it through, coded its DNA, looked for the specific markers, 60% would come up as being Africanized. The population has continued to move northward. However, since their study in 2006, that northward extension has been only 150 miles. Only 150 miles since 2006. So basically in 8 years, the population has moved from Bakersfield to Stockton in the Central Valley. There's a mistake on this one. They are now, you can go to pick any bee off a flower in the Stockton area. This should be 25 miles south of Sacramento, not north. And you have a great probability you're going to find Africanized bees. 9 But if you go in front of the bee colony, you're going to have a greater probability of being European bees. But picking bees off of flowers, all right, random picking bees, they find that you can regularly find the bees then almost up to Sacramento, Central Valley. Now, the bees get introduced other places. The incident here in Marin County, of course, is one of the more famous ones, or infamous ones. Whoops, let's see. Should have been another slide here that talked about Colorado. I know you're not interested in Colorado, but I threw it in just to pick on another state. Colorado had their first reported Africanized bee colony in just a couple years ago, in 2014. And they felt that the colony came from one of two sources. And this is the case with many other introductions as well. It came from colonies being moved back to Colorado from pollination, or bees being introduced into Colorado that were born and raised somewhere else. That incident that they found that those bees in Colorado could have been from either. And that's the case with many other regions as well. Why? We don't know. The short answer, we don't know. We do know, as they move southward from Sao Paulo in Brazil, to Paraguay, to the country south of Brazil, into Argentina, they stalled about the 32nd, 34th parallel. So during winter in South America, in Argentina, they're found only really in northern Argentina to about the 32nd parallel south, latitude south. During the favorable season, they move move further south to about the 34th. Right? In California, seems like the same thing has happened. The 34th parallel runs through LA into Riverside County, over to Arizona, New Mexico, etc. So they have moved north of the 34th parallel, but in roughly 8 years, not very further north, 150 miles. But below that, the probability of picking up Africanized bees is much, much, much greater, okay, to as high as 60%. Just any bee taken off a flower in San Diego County. The same line goes through Arkansas. So the states that you saw that have some color in them in that probability index map were the states primarily with the color, the lighter color, not the blue color, were states that were below the 34th parallel. Okay. LA to roughly Charleston, South Carolina, and somewhat of a smile across the southern U.S.
Any idea why?
We have no idea why, except, as I said, this is a population of bees that has this certain characteristic that we can characterize, and as it reaches more temperate type of conditions, a longer resource season when there's not forage available, a different rainfall pattern season, it doesn't do as well. European bees, temperately raised bees, that are Italian bees out of Europe, do better in that. So when you have the competition in the environment that is more temperate, European bees predominate. When it is subtropical or tropical, African population predominate. And we have then that transition before. That transition is roughly around that 34th parallel. So what you're getting then in Sacramento is a bit more of a winter, a bit more of a non-resource season compared to Bakersfield. Better suited for European bees. Bakersfield, a little bit longer, a little bit shorter winter, warmer temperatures, a little more hotter. It's more suitable for a subtropical bee, the African population. And the same is occurring in Argentina. The bee is not in Chile, so we don't have the Chile comparison as we do in Argentina. It is not in Chile. So, question?
In your probability map, what's happening in our area?
I've glossed over that completely. Let me come back to that question. What's happening here in Marin County? Let me just finish up and now we'll come back to it. So what has happened here in 1982? I'm visiting a backyard in Panama City. Retired ship captain proudly showing me his nice gentle teeth, like we all do with our bees. Okay? Uncle Joe comes in from the East Coast. We got to show him our bee count. Here we are not in the suburb anymore of Panama City, but in Panama, dressed, two smokers going, the bees just boiling out of there, and immediately we get this halo of bees around us. Okay? You need to prepare for the defensiveness, you need to isolate, and you need to corral colonies under these conditions. And by corral, I'm talking about a vegetation corral. You need to, as we do here, we put them out of sight, out of mind. Okay, so we don't bother the neighbors. We are stealth beekeepers in much of the county here. There too, but you have to do that for protection of your neighbors' animals and kids and other people. So vegetation corral. The major challenge has been to find stock. Every country has started a breeding program once the bees arrive. And in the tropical areas, what we found was the pioneering population of African honeybees are the absolute pits. They are the worst bees. Very defensive, very swarming, very nervous in the colony. And after the population has been in an area for a few years, 3 to 5 more years after the initial colonization, they start to calm down a bit. Beekeepers get rid of the worst, most defensive, and you start getting bees you can kind of handle a little bit. So, and the changeover from European to African is 2 years. Okay? So that was the changeover in Costa Rica, in Panama, Mexico, and in South Texas. In 2 years, changed from nothing but European genetic material colonization. In 2 years, the majority of the stock was then Africanized. So all the countries started queen rearing programs. And the problem with queen rearing is you need isolation if you want to control the drone line. You can raise perfectly good queens with the learning of a little bit of technique, but you need to control the male, the patricide, okay? So they would set up these queen rearing operations in the worst beekeeping territories in the country because there were no bees there. It was an isolated area. Or they would go offshore and put it all on an island. And islands, don't have enough forage, and the rest of it's all water. So, I mean, just the worst beekeeping area. So here is a selected bee from Panama. This is their research agency, IDIA, in Panama. And you can see that as we're taking the cover off of this colony, they are exploding out of the colony. So this is their improved stock that they've come up with in Panama. Finding the queens is very difficult. You're basically pushing all the bees through an excluder, about the only way you can do it. You can't find it. Queens run like crazy. They're very adverse to light. You open up the colony and they're off to the races. You often don't find them on any of the frames. You find them on the box, particularly down here at the bottom. Now the other thing that occurs is that if you're going to do hybridization, you want to take a very defensive African bee, Africanized bee, and change it. You've got to bring in your European stock. South of the equator, all of that stock has to come in from Hawaii because we can't ship the stuff from California that early. So when you bring in the European bees, you put them in your apiary, and then you're going to try to use that stock and breed it, crossbreed it with the African stock, your European colonies go downhill. And so after you establish your European colony in a year, it no longer exists. It has expired. It doesn't get enough resources to live through the season, whereas the Africanized bees do. So you really have to pamper these European colonies. And so then you can produce a hybrid. And under the conditions that we're trying to produce these hybrids, it's been very difficult. And really only 3 countries have succeeded: Brazil, Costa Rica and Mexico have succeeded in maintaining a queen breeding program. And in all three of the countries, we have more manageable stock because they are doing this continual evaluation, continual interbreeding, continual effort at keeping a hybrid rather than pure African. It's impossible to keep pure European, so they're trying to keep something in between. So very few breeding programs continue. Okay? They kind of take the fun out of beekeeping.
Yeah.
They really do. Their response, their defensiveness, they are not a bee to manage. In my colonies in Bolivia, I'm basically robbing bees. Not any different than that Maasai warrior from Africa, or they've done for centuries in South America. I'm basically robbing. I'm taking the outer frames of honey and taking it from the bees. I'm letting them go ahead and abscond and then harvest everything. I harvest the brood, I harvest the stored bee bread. There's very little left at the end of the season. And the bees, I'm either driving the bees away or they're going on their own. So I can have a harvest. So my harvest is roughly every 2 weeks. I harvest a couple of frames from all my colonies every 2 weeks. And as the colonies get a little bit bigger, I knock them back. Okay? So I'm trying to deal with smaller, younger colonies, expanding colonies, and I'm trying to take what little resource they do store from me into their colony. So yes, I do a lot of harvest, but I'm harvesting a lot less honey from the colonies. Okay? And so as I indicated, relatively few beekeepers actually super. They're just not amenable to it. They just ignore those boxes put on top, pretty much. And of course, having foundation is next to impossible. Their cash crop is beeswax to the cosmetic industry. And it's much more valuable to sell the beeswax than it is to try and take it into foundation. However, where I live in Bolivia, in Cochabamba, I'm at 8,200 feet elevation, okay, higher than Denver. Okay, I'm more than a mile high. These are my colonies. These were colonies. I had the colonies. We have usually a pig here most of the year till we kill it and then start some more. There's a family that lives over here, and these are my colonies. Okay? In other words, they are still around animals and still around people, but it's 8,200 feet. The difference is this adaptation that the bees and environmental conditions have. 8,200 feet is not tropical. Right? We could best describe our climate in this valley as forever spring. Very hot in the sun in the middle of the day, it's 8,200 feet, but you need a sweater at night and the first thing in the morning. And rain is confined to a very short part of the season. Most of the time it's dry. At that location, I can keep bees and people and animals together because the bees are more manageable. And of course, now I keep cutting back my strong colonies. I don't let any colony get very strong. I'm trying to stop swarming, but I'm also trying to get the harvest. The big difference, of course, with all the product that I harvest there, I sell, but the rest of the world, other than Europe and North America and Japan, the rest of the world, honey is not a food. Honey is not tea or toast. It's medicine. Your bee colony is your neighborhood pharmacy for anything and everything, the very serious human diseases, all the way to the cuts and scrapes, for the headache, for the animal that won't reproduce, for humans that don't reproduce well, whatever. Anything, constipation, diarrhea, both of them. If you're not going now, it'll get you going. Keep you going. But then it'll stop it from going, okay? All of that. So honey is a medicine. And it's equally, I harvest all the other products just as well. Usually sell all of them as a mixture. I sell the propolis just as propolis, but I also mix it with honey and mix royal jelly and of course beeswax into with cosmetics, etc. Okay. They are also now a ready resource. When I go to Bolivia, I'm doing a number of training programs because now for people in the rural area that don't have 2 pennies to put together, it's not a cash economy, they have a ready source, the bees just appear. So if you put a box out, you put bee smell in it, the bees come. They come and they inhabit the box. And many of the communities that we do these projects in, 3 bee colonies can about double the family average income. 3 bee colonies. So commercial beekeepers are talking about having 25 to 30 colonies to make a living, a full living for bee colonies. So they're a resource. So capturing the swarms, free, okay? They're basically practicing destruct harvest, so it doesn't really matter what you put them in, anything cheap, whatever. And then a member of the family sits at the local market, bringing the kids along, and so she has a bucket of honey that's been harvested, rustic, destruct harvest. So in here is some liquid honey, some honey in the comb, there's some pollen, there's some bee bread, and you come along and she puts a piece of wax paper in your hand and she spoons out how much you want to pay or what you want. I'd rather have brood, I'd rather have white honey, and then you take it, and you're not then going to eat it. You're not going to continue down the stalls and eat it. You're taking it home as a medicine because someone has a headache, someone has a serious condition, your animal got a cut on a fence or a bush or something, et cetera, et cetera. Products for healthy life, okay? The other aspect, and one that we are really interested in, is that African honeybees can tolerate growing. We're not sure why, but at least these 3 mechanisms seem to be involved, okay? The African honeybee pupae show higher rates of infertile varroa females, higher rates. And most of these studies are done with European bees brought into the environment, kept for a period of time, a couple of generations at least, and then the study's made. So it's not comparing European bees in California with Africanized bees in Venezuela. Okay, so these are side-by-side studies of the 2 types of bees in the same location. We don't know why. We do not know why. We do know mites have to feed on bee blood. That then starts the process of the maturation of the eggs of the female mite. When they feed on the blood of Africanized honeybees, the African stock, they just are not able to produce eggs that are fertilized. Of course, the varroa female produces 2 types of eggs, just like the honeybee. She's also parthogenic. So she's producing not only a single male egg after 60 hours, but then the next egg is also a male egg, a non-fertilized egg. And with the development time of 19.5 days, she doesn't then have the ability to lay fertile eggs that can produce a daughter, a female daughter, something like herself, a reproductive like female. Right? Another factor is this faster development. Okay? This has become somewhat controversial because it relates to the fact that these bees are somewhat smaller, so they have a smaller cell size. And so this gets translated in some cases, in some individuals, that if we grow European bees in smaller cell sizes, they will be able to combat the varroa mite better. That is not true, but it is true if the smaller cell size results in a faster development of the European stock. It's not cell size per se, it's size of body and how many development days are in the capped stage. The African honeybee bees are not in cap stage long enough for Mrs. Mite to raise a female, mature female. So all the mites are only raised at drone brood. And this bee has a neat way. It doesn't raise drone brood like our European bees do throughout the season. They raise drones only in the early part of development. So in nature, that's right away. They raise lots of brood, raise drones, and they swarm. Right away. When we keep them in colonies, like I'm doing, and knocking them back all the time, then I can keep getting drone production in colonies. So my mite number might jump up to as much as 8%, but I don't control mites. Okay? Anything above 3 to 5% here, I'm thinking of some method of a technique or a chemical to control mites in my bees in Oregon. And if I don't, my bees are dead. Okay? We'll be dead very soon. So I have to come up with a technique, I have to come up with a chemical treatment that will knock that number, that 3 to 5% back below the 2%. Not so with this bee. The number can bounce up to 8%, and our colonies still do very well. So we do not need to control varroa mite, right? The faster rate of development, and finally, and this is very controversial, depending on which study you look at, it is not hygienic behavior in these bees. Or, in some studies, these bees are super hygienic. So take your pick. Okay? The best of the studies seem to say it's not hygienic behavior. And we have all kinds of hygienic behavior in our bees. The two most common ones in what we're looking at today are the ability to detect a mite feeding on a pupae, the workers uncapping the cell, and then taking the mite off the pupae or throwing the pupae away. Okay, so cannibalizing their potential sister, the pupa itself. That's what we call the DSH or what we call hygienic behavior. That's what we're measuring when we put hydrogen in a group of cells, kill those cells, and count how many are removed within a day's period of time. That's a type of hygienic behavior. Greg Hunt and others are working on a different type of hygienic behavior, and that is grooming. Grooming of worker bees, grooming the mites off the bodies of their sisters, the so-called ankle biters, okay? Because they bite off legs. It's about all they can get out off of the mite. They might take a chunk out of their exoskeleton, and the mite dehydrates, so it doesn't live because it's got something biting on it. It's got a worker bee biting on it. Okay, thanks. So take our pick. It's because the bees are more hygienic, or it's because of one of these other characteristics, the infertility or the faster development, or a combination of any of those three.
Are all the behaviors neurological based, or is there anything else?
What behaviors? All the behaviors neurological based?
Either one, the Africanized honeybee reaction, being able to control the mites, and the VHS European honey ankle biters. Is it all neurological, or are there some other advantages of bigger, longer tongues, anything outside of the neurological behaviors?
I don't know how to answer that question. I don't know. I'm not sure how to answer that question. The development time is a behavior that's hardwired. Okay, so that is genetic based. If you want to call that neurological, yes. The ankle biters is a grooming behavior. It's based on a selection of genes, a whole bunch of them. And the people at Purdue have been able to show that you can enhance that quality. You can, in other words, select. And we've shown this with all kinds of characteristics, okay? There's variation in bees. Let's say there's variation in their hygienicity, or there's variation in how much alfalfa pollen they collect. So we start a breeding program, all right? And our first breeding is we identify colonies that collect a lot of alfalfa pollen or are pretty hygienic, and another group of bees that collect a little bit of alfalfa pollen and aren't very hygienic, right? So then within this population, we breed just within that population. In this population, we just breed in that population. In 3 generations of such breeding, we now have a statistical difference. Bees that are more hygienic and a line of bees that are less hygienic. In 3 populations only, in three generations only. Or high alfalfa collectors, very poor alfalfa collectors. So we've demonstrated that for American foul brood, you name it, anything. In a very small number of generations, we can take that variation that's in bees and with just straight line breeding, come up with 2 separate populations, a high and a low one. So that we can do the same with grooming behavior, we can do the same for the DSH, in other words, uncapping the cells, yanking out the pupa, and throwing them away. I don't know if that's a better answer, but the other, if it's not neurological, would have to be it's morphological based on their morphology. What we need are honeybees that have Swiss Army knives. And then they could go and just decimate all those mites that are in the colony.
That would
But
be
it's not
more
morphological.
We need a bionic bee.
Bionic bee. Okay. So they can tolerate. The other concept that I wanted to leave you with is this is a different type of keeping bees. It's a top bar hive, basically, in a Langstroth, perma apiculture. So these are single frames. And so here we're building larger colonies. It is popular, so we're looking at the brood nest of a colony. And in this case, if you could keep them in the colonies, in some places we have that ability, you could add supers on top of this. Okay? So here's your regular frame and then wild comb below it or natural comb. We believe in keeping our colonies 24/7, 52. We're trying to manage, we're trying to reduce losses. Some of us are trying to do something about swarming. Some of us are trying to do feeding. Some of us are using very powerful chemicals, very powerful antibiotics, others not. You know, there's any number of variations in terms of keeping bees because we're trying to keep our bees in our yard. We're trying to keep them there through the winter. And we're hoping that our bees give us 2 weeks back out of those 52. Those are the 2 weeks when they will store some surplus. That's going to be our reward, our harvest, 2 weeks out of the 52. But we're trying to keep them there, set. Africanized bees, I'm not. Okay? I don't care if they go away after my last harvest. Because when I put the boxes back out, as soon as resource comes back, as soon as we get a little bit of rain, we start getting some flowers, they come back. And they inhabit those boxes. And if a colony stays, as soon as the flowers come, that colony gets so big it wants to swarm. So I cut it right back. So I make several colonies out of anything that does survive my apiary. And in the meantime, I'm essentially setting bait hives out and they're coming to me. So I don't care about the rest of the year. I'm trying to keep that resource for a period of time. A large number of our individuals that have the philosophy that they don't want to put any treatments in their colonies are doing about the same thing. They're not worried about keeping that resource over the winter because they're going to buy new packages. They're going to take the colonies that do have a good time fighting mites, that do survive winter, that get big in the spring, and they're going to make splits out of it. Okay? So yes, you lose 50%, 70% of your colonies. So what? You still have some colonies, or you have money to buy more nukes and more packages. So we're, some people that keep bees are adapting that philosophy. Many of us were aghast when we heard that many Canadian beekeepers, when they could get packages from California, that's going back a few years now, basically killed off their colonies in the fall. Tried to overwinter very few number of colonies because they could bring truckloads of packages up. So if you harvested your colony down to the last drop of honey, you harvest 120 pounds of honey that you would have had to leave in your colony over winter, okay, and still lost a number of the colonies. And at the time of that time, packages were at a price where you harvested most of your colonies, like you harvest most of your skeps. You kept bees and skeps. You kept the middle-sized ones. You didn't keep the strong ones. You didn't keep the weak ones. You took your winter losses in the fall, and you just overwintered those skeps that were sort of medium-sized. They did the same in Canada. And then they brought packages in and put them in the colonies, in the combs that were drawn comb. So they had the valuable resource of drawn comb. In other words, not trying to keep the resource. Well, that's what we do with Africanized bees. And that's what's happening to a subset of our population keeping bees, starting bees these days. We're attempting to keep that resource through the winter, accepting levels of loss 50, 60, 70% because they're going to replace the colonies. And they've got the resource now to do that. They've got drawn comb. Okay? You ready to run me out of the room? Some of you are, right? That's not a very great concept, is it?
Did you just say, so rather than lose because you're going to have losses, why not rob them early, get some resource, let them go, and replace them in the next spring? Okay, I just want to make sure I heard.
It's 8:50. I got to finish up. Okay. Now, the other thing, of course, in this culture, we keep another bee. These are the stingless bees. And you don't go to doctors for much of your medicine. You go to a practitioner, and practitioners use honey. But European honeybee honey is different from stingless bee honey. And so for cataracts, anything with eyes, you don't use European honey. You use stingless bee honey. Okay? So many of the larger beekeepers are also keepers with stingless bees. So you have more of a grouping of bees. And we've got to do that with honeybees for our pollinators. They've got to get the culture of keeping mason bees or helping grow alkali bees or growing Bach, the blue orchard bee, or bumblebees, because those bees do better jobs on some types of pollination than do honeybees.
You mean manage them?
Manage them, I mean. Okay? So that as a pollinator, you're not a pollinator with honeybees, you are a pollinator of bee service, of bee pollination service. And so for that, you need a stable. You need not just one type, one variety, but you need several. Okay? So we're moving in different directions. All righty, I think we do have, we've got some time for some questions. Yes?
I just wanted you